Welcome to Mental Health Momentum, a Silicon Slopes podcast. I'm Dr. David Morgan. I'm a licensed psychologist and the Director of Mental Health Awareness at Silicon Slopes. And here at Silicon Slopes, we recognize the importance of mental health, and we have this podcast to look for solutions in how to do this in business and other enterprises, figure out how to improve our mental health in general. My guest on the podcast today is Dr. Kyle Reyes. Dr. Reyes is the Vice President of Institutional Advancement at Utah Valley University, which is the largest university in the state of Utah with over 43,000 students. And before this appointment, he was the VP of Student Affairs, and he was their Senior Diversity and Inclusion Officer as well. He is a tenured professor of education at UVU and has taught courses in multicultural education, family and community partnerships, and arts-based education. One of the most exciting things recently is, in the bio says he's currently wrapping up a 5-year book project, but as we've talked about, it is wrapped, it is ready, and launching here. And by the time this podcast launches, this book will have launched. It's called Lenses of Humanity: How Reflection, Connection, and Empathy Can Change Our World. And I'm super excited to talk about that as well. He's on the board of Asian Pacific Americans in Higher Education and has served on the Utah Governor's Multicultural Commission. Kyle, thank you so much for coming.
It's my pleasure.
I think this is the first other PhD we've had on the program, so
okay.
There we go. And
Wonderful.
And I'll be David and you be Kyle, right?
Let's do it.
That's awesome. I should mention the other thing in your bio. So you have a multicultural family in general. Your wife is Navajo?
Yes.
And then you are Hawaiian, Filipino, and Japanese?
Correct.
How did that happen?
Yeah. So mom from the Big Island of Hawaii, her father Japanese, and then she met my father from the Philippines. She met him in Los Angeles.
Oh, okay.
And then Michelle and I met out in Utah, and her origins from the Navajo Nation down in northeastern Arizona. So yeah, we have 7 children, and they have all of these wonderful heritages.
That's amazing. You know, it's interesting living in the United States of America, and we don't have a lot of culture. You know, I mean, U.S. culture is very, very young by most standards, right? And I mean, Navajo culture goes back thousands and thousands of years. I love this. You and I were talking earlier just about the diversity that kind of has made America what it is, and I think is what makes it just amazing.
Agreed.
Anyway, so can you tell us just a little bit about, well, you mentioned a little bit about your family, and we talked about your employment. Any interest specifically in like mental health?
Yeah. So I'll just jump in first. Thanks for having me on this. This is an important topic to me. I'm passionate about discussing all things mental health. Partly because I'm fascinated by humans. I'm fascinated by lifting humans and the human spirit. As mentioned, I've been working at Utah Valley University for 21 years in a variety of capacities. And I would say that if you asked me, Kyle, which position is most tied to helping student mental health, it would be hard for me to answer that. And partly because when I started my career at UVU in 2003, it was as an outreach counselor to those in our high schools, local high schools who were low income and first generation. Parents never went to college. And I think to myself, gosh, at that moment, and I would visit some high schools where students just never consider themselves college material. Right. And I would come into that situation trying to reframe their mindset and really counter some narrative they had in their brain that they are not meant for this. They're not meant. For me, that's the start of that mental health journey with that student. Fast forward all the way to the various positions I've held, whether it was in multicultural services or as the chief of staff to our former president. In everything that we did, we had very serious conversations about creating a sense of community. But why? It's not just for creating community. We wanted every student to see themselves potentially be successful at UVU. And in order to do that, we said we've got to understand the complexity of what scripts and narratives they're bringing to the table. Every time they walk through the halls, it's one thing to say, oh, why doesn't every student just fit into our standards? And cookie cutter approach, you all are going to rise to whatever standard we set. And UVU, it's part of our DNA to say, bring whatever you have. Right. We'll add to it. Oh, and by the way, we see that you're unique and you're unique. And that means we have to be on our game when it comes to all that you bring with you. And so mental health has been a part of every conversation throughout my 21-year career at UVU.
I love that idea of community and creating a sense of belonging as well.
Yeah.
I think it was last year the Surgeon General released a report on loneliness. And
I know what report you're talking about.
Yeah. And basically, and compared it, or not compared it, but and I'm sure it's not directly responsible, but it co-varies with significant health problems and things
so
like
many
that.
things.
He said it's almost the equivalent of smoking a couple packs of cigarettes a day, just people who are chronically lonely. And you can be lonely in a group of 43,000 students too.
Yep.
And so it's not just about having a crowd.
Right.
It's about creating that sense of community and saying that, like you said, that we see you, you are valued, you're acknowledged, and what you bring to this is important. What you bring to this, and in that sense, the community is just constantly evolving, right? I mean, UVU isn't the same today as it was yesterday.
It is evolving, and you said something important there, because that study talks about loneliness, social isolation. It talks about a number of variables within the workplace, the differences between generations, and how every generation is getting lonelier in each generation moving forward. And see, it's not on UVU to say, hey, we've created a community, you have to fit in that community.
Right.
It's let's be listening all the time, watching. And so when we say to a student, we see you, we hear you, what does community mean to you? Then we go create that. That's a different thing than saying, oh, we have 20 communities, choose which one you want to be a part of.
Right.
Now, we do a little bit of that.
Sure.
But if we're authentic with creating community, then the student defines what community means to them. And for so many of our students, they've said, somebody who believes in me, somebody, a mentor, a teacher, a faculty member, or even a peer who gets me, who sees all that I bring to the table, my identities, my language, my accent, whatever that might be. And that's pretty exciting for us.
I love that. And I would say that's not particularly common. I think that in probably the tradition of higher education, it's been more, look, we set the standard.
Exactly.
Here's what's required to get in. Here's what's required to be successful, and here's what's required to graduate. And you need to meet that standard. And certainly, standards needs to exist because if someone's going to walk out of there with a bachelor's degree in something, they need to have proven something, according to some sort of accredited body or whatever it is. However, there's more to it than that, and you can in the in between, I guess, is where you can really help foster that sense of independence and uniqueness, even because when we leave the university, we're unique as well, right?
Agreed.
Not every person that earns an MBA at BYU is not exactly the same. They all go, even though they had to do exactly the same things to get there, they're completely different when they leave. All these unique things, and trying to recognize that uniqueness in the meantime. It's a challenge, I'm sure.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. But one we're committed to, right? As an open admissions university. So
your whole career has been based on, well, not entirely, but really focusing on the disadvantaged and minority groups and helping to champion them. What can we do in mental health, even just in mental health care in general? I mean, how do we reach these populations? Because typically I think they're kind of underserved as well.
I think there's a number of variables and kind of contextual points that, I mean, this is a really good question. It's a big question, right?
Yes.
And I could go down different rabbit holes. I'll stay here. Part of what I'm trying to promote in all that I do is to value the richness of diversity. And the reason why I say that is when we start to understand that it's not only okay, but it's wonderful to embrace the diverse narratives, languages, experiences, we actually start to realize, oh my goodness, there is something that I don't know about how I might deal with mental health issues that I face. And maybe somebody else who looks at the world the way I do, but I'm starting to realize that just because my view of the world is my norm, it is not the norm.
Right.
And that's not that person's norm. I'll give you one example. For a community that is less controversial in the diversity conversation, the veterans community. We serve a large population of military-affiliated students at UVU. I have great respect for those who have served our country and sacrificed in any branch of the military. It's interesting when I talk to students who've served or family members of those who've served in the military, and they talk about mental health issues, okay? And they come to our Veteran Success Center, which is, by the way, now rebranded as MASH, the Military Affiliated Student Hub. It's amazing. When they come to those services, And as soon as they walk through that door and the staff member says, what branch of the military? And they said, Army National Guard, Air Force, Marines. And then they say, oh, I served in this one. There is something about that exchange where that student says, I'm home.
Yep.
Somebody gets me. And in fact, they actually not only get the fact that I have to navigate the GI Bill, that I have to navigate some acclimating to civilian life, that I have to help my family access resources. They just get what it's like to have served. They get the mental health issues that come. I don't have to explain, I might need something for PTSD. I need to find community. They get me. Mm-hmm. When it comes to various underserved populations, it's less about some woke agenda. I promise you. You know, when I was serving with Matt Holland, our former president, it's not like we were in the back room trying to concoct some liberal agenda around diversity. You know what we were doing instead? We were trying to say, how do we serve our students better, authentically? Oh, and by the way, we can't treat them all exactly the same. Yeah. Let's figure this out. And so when it came to making sure that we are showing up for all of our students, and you know, it wasn't just the underserved, but all of our students, can we also layer on top of that we need to recognize the power of a student, an international student, coming to through the campus of UVU, and what does it mean for them to say, does anybody actually get me? Does anybody see me? Does anybody see me in my international studentness, right? And so for me, when it comes to recognizing the value, or recognizing that mental health issues look different depending on your ethnic, racial, orientation, religious, spiritual backgrounds. The lenses you develop based on your lived experiences are going to formulate how you address things so much differently than me. Mm-hmm. And that's beautiful and okay. But if I don't recognize that, I'm going to miss a chance to support you in what you need for your mental health.
Yeah. One of the things that was a kind of a turning point in my life, I grew up in Southern California, and my high school was relatively diverse, but the people kind of kept to themselves. Like, you know, the Caucasians kept to themselves, and Latinos kept to themselves, and African Americans kept to themselves. There was kind of these silos of groups. And then I was called to serve a LDS mission in Mexico, and never been out of the country. And the thing that fascinated me the most once I got there was that, and I knew plenty of people from Mexico, just interacted with them at my school in Bakersfield, but they were all pretty unidimensional to me. And that's my fault, because because I hadn't taken the opportunity to get to know them or to talk to them. And I just kind of said, oh, well, they, you know, it's almost a pejorative term, but we're kind of like this, until I got to Mexico. And I was astonished, because there was every single type of person there. There were the jokesters and the serious ones, and the hard workers, and the ones that just like to take it easy. I mean, and I remember thinking, oh, that person is just like my friend Jeff, and that person is just like my friend Sarah. The only difference was their skin tone was a little different, and they spoke a different language, but otherwise their personalities were identical. And that's something that I've remembered now, almost 30 years later, is just that regardless of what I don't know about a person, they're going to be incredibly diverse. They're going to be so individual. And so when we can step back, and it takes a lot more brain work to do. And like at UVU, it takes a lot more effort to try to take this one person at a time than to just say, okay, look, this is the UVU way. Come and join us. And if you can't fit in, then too bad, you know. It's a lot more labor intensive and cognitively laborious to have to think about that than to just say, well, I apply one lens to all people.
Yeah. I mean, higher education, you mentioned this earlier, but higher education has this history of elitism, right? It's called the ivory tower for a reason. And the more and more, historically they've said, well, community colleges are where it's for the masses, and then universities are for those who can make it. What UVU is trying to do in terms of changing that narrative overall is to say, no, we accept everyone like a community college, but we've got the quality, and we invite students to rise to the challenge, like those standards. But first, on their way in, we have to communicate to them, whatever you bring to the table, we are going to add to that. We don't
Right.
have to. We're not going to cut you off because you don't match some magical standard here. But we still have standards on the way out, right?
There's
we still have expectations,
of
right?
course.
The other thing I'll just say, thank you for sharing that example. I would imagine that you, after that experience in Mexico, your lenses shifted permanently.
Yeah.
You can't unsee that anymore, and you literally, because now you have two different languages to express yourself in the world and to make connections authentically, especially with people from Mexican origins. You are a changed person, right? And so what's interesting to me is when we talk about exposure and engagement with diversity, for mental health, it's not just you being more sensitive to somebody else's mental health in terms of how somebody from Mexico might be interpreting their world, but your own mental health is more positive. It's more, I don't have to carry the weight of prejudice or the weight of judgment and the weight of ignorance about that group or that group, whether it's Muslim or Sikh religiously. It's like, no, I actually have friends. They've changed my lenses, and now it has helped me feel more positive and about difference.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Later in life, I ended up, most of my career in psychology was in forensic psychology, where I worked with the criminal justice system for about 20 years.
Wow.
And adopted a new lens as well.
Yeah.
Right? Because I would read police reports before I would meet people and hear about all the stuff that they were accused of doing. And in almost every case, they'd been convicted in a court of law. So we weren't there to debate whether they had done it or not.
Sure.
Guilty. And now let's move forward. But again, every time they were individuals and there were unique things about them. And most of them were very regretful about the things they had done and just wanted to learn how to be better as a result. And so I think for me, that was almost the nail in the coffin of my old lenses. I was just like, you know what? Every person has their own story, and I acknowledge that there are dangerous people out there, and there are people that I probably wouldn't want to hang out with, but I can't understand that by knowing two things about them.
Exactly.
I need to take a long time to know a lot about them, and like I said, I worked with a lot of dangerous people, and even in those cases, I'm like, you know what? I could see myself being friends with this guy in a different circumstance. So let's talk about your book. Just because I love this idea of, tell me the name again.
Lenses of Humanity.
Okay.
Yep.
Lenses, which I love that idea of like changing perceptions, right? Just like literally when you think of a lens, you put it on and it changes a perception, right? Either it makes it darker or makes it clearer or whatever it is.
Exactly.
And so much of mental health has to do with our perceptions.
Yep.
It's how we understand the world, and we have these narratives that they're developed in any number of ways and influenced by a lot of different things. Some of them seem to be born with, some come through just upbringing or trauma or all sorts of things. And then those narratives create results. And when those results are unfavorable, that's when we have to say, how do I get out of this unfavorable situation? Yeah. And in just about every case, changing that lens is one of the most important things. So, and the book is particularly regarding multiculturalism.
The book is regarding human connection and understanding.
Oh, okay.
Sure, there's issues of multiculturalism in there, but no, I mean, look, for me, one of the experiences I had was, back in the day, I needed some glasses, and I went to the optometrist, and I got my prescription, got my first pair of glasses, and throughout my whole doctoral dissertation, for that time I was doing my PhD and then finishing my dissertation, I realized towards the end, my eyes were getting blurry again, or my vision was getting blurry again, even with my glasses on. So I go back to the same optometrist, and she said something that actually made its way into my final dissertation. She said, Kyle, without you realizing it, your lenses consistently shift on you. Without you, it's a passive process. You don't actively think, my lenses are always shifting.
Right.
She said that to me at a time when I was trying to distill this idea of how do we help people understand that their perspectives shape their behaviors. Their perspectives and the stories we tell ourselves shape our behaviors and our interactions with other humans. So once I layered that on top of this idea of the book that I was working on, which is cultural understanding, cultural awareness and understanding, it became my framework. And it became this framework where I just said, over and over again, I came back to, if I could share a message with the world in a way that wasn't, I'm not trying to be controversial, but to invite people to lean into life with a bit more humanity, what would those lenses be? And that's where these 4 lenses emerged. I'm actually excited for you to read the book, only because for those who are psychologists, the first 6 chapters is basically taken from an analysis of the brain, of how synapses, schema are developed. So the 4 lenses are: the inner lens, looking inward, that we have to unpack our stuff first. Okay. Second is context, is that we need to develop a greater contextual lens, which means engagement, immersion, exposure to difference.
Like gaining more understanding of things, getting more data, basically.
Getting more data, exactly. Okay. And then there's the empathy lens. That's the one-to-one interaction with other humans. And then it's the community lens. How do we lift groups of people? And what I argue throughout the book is it takes intentionality. Yeah. And nobody ever arrives. Like, there's no expert. I mean, I wrote the book, and I'm sitting here admitting in the book, I got a long way to go on developing these lenses, because it's an ongoing thing. Yeah. I find myself making judgments. I find myself reacting to somebody's statement, and then I have to believe what I wrote. And I say, okay, well, let me pause and let me actually walk this talk and lean in with more humanity, because they're not my enemy. They have opinions based on their world and life experiences. Right. And I need to understand that. We don't have to agree on everything, but if I can understand them, I think we can, heal the world a little bit at a time. Yeah. And there's so much more that connects us as human beings. And like you said, like we were talking about earlier, all one needs to do is really travel outside of the United States of America for a little bit, or even travel to different places. Yeah, the Navajo Nation down in Arizona, exactly, right? My son is doing his PhD in Kentucky right now, and so we go to Louisville periodically to visit him. And the people are just wonderful, and they're different than the people I grew up with in California and then people I live among here in Utah. And I love what you said about being intentional as well, because like the example the optometrist said, just the idea of entropy, right, is that things are constantly getting worse. Yeah. That's just the way it goes. Our bodies are constantly breaking down, and eventually we end up dead. But so we have to do things intentionally to stave that off, right? We have to exercise our muscles, and we have to, get glasses or whatever it is to try to, so our eyes don't go as bad maybe as quickly. I don't know how it works. But we have to do that with our thinking as well, because otherwise the brain craves homeostasis, right? It wants comfort, things to be very, very simple, very, very simple. Peace, comfort, safety, pleasure, that our brain defaults to those, right? And so that's why when there's an engagement with difference, and we talk about fight or flight or freeze, it really is this, okay, the intentionality. I want to grow, so therefore I'm going to exercise my humanity muscle, and I'm going to lean in, and I'm going to engage. And it might be uncomfortable, but this is where growth takes place. Right? And the brain changes as a result of that. It does. I mean, that's one of the things that people don't understand. They think, oh, well, I have a chemical imbalance, or my brain is just this way. Agreed. Every brain starts somewhere, but it's changing all the time. And whatever you feed it, it's going to adapt to that eventually, and will create those pathways that will that can lead to much better things, or for negative as well. I mean, exactly. I think the brain is pretty dispassionate in that regard. It says, whatever you feed me, I'm going to assimilate at some point. And you can, so whatever you want is fine. It's not up there making a decision how it wants to be. Agreed. Talking about perceptions, lenses that need changing, but I guess it's just the 4 that you talked about, and in that order, is that the way? Well, So let me back up. The thesis actually of the book, before you actually get to the framework of lenses and why we need the lenses, the thesis was born out of my own research, and my research was this: anytime a human joins a new community, that could be a new classroom in the school setting, that could be a new community they moved into a new neighborhood, that could be immigrates to a new country. Anytime a human, there are some things we yearn for that we may not be able to articulate, but we yearn for them. And this is done through scores and scores of focus groups, surveys, meta-analysis of other research. And it goes beyond sort of Maslow's hierarchy, right? When we join new communities, what do we yearn for? And my findings show that we yearn for essentially 3 things that kind of track with Maslow, but they're unique in their coding. One is safety and stability. We crave it. Now, again, when we drive to a new community, we don't always say, I crave safety and stability, but we're looking for it subconsciously. Right. Second is connection and belonging. And third is purpose and value. So when I meet with educators and I say, hey, think about it. A student comes to your classroom without ever saying it to you, here's what they want. They're trying to see, is my identity safe and stable here? Can I find community, connection, belonging? And am I going to find a sense of purpose and value, right? Does it matter that I'm here? Those are all very mental health related questions. Does it matter that I'm here? Right? Am I safe here?
Right.
Do I have people that get me here? So then my thesis is, and I argue that our humanity is found in our ability to help other humans find those three things. No matter, it could be a neighborhood, it could be a church service, it could be as an educator. I believe I'm becoming more humanity driven if I'm looking intentionally at my students saying, how do I help you find safety, stability, connection, belonging, purpose, and value? Now, here's how you can do it. There are 4 lenses you can actively exercise and develop to then help land those things for another human.
Awesome. I am super excited to read this book. Tell us the name again.
Lenses of Humanity, How Reflection, Connection, and Empathy Can Heal Our World.
Okay. Lenses of Humanity. Type that into your Google search bar. Go find it and read it. Kyle, thank you so much for coming and talking to me today. It's been a pleasure to visit with you. I appreciate your expertise and just the, humanity, I guess, for lack of a better word. We need to come together as people, and this is a great start. So
thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Of course. Thanks everyone for listening. Please tune in to future episodes where we'll talk with other guests and explore different ways to increase our mental health momentum.